Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with potato chip cookies. That's right, we're making chocolate chip cookies with potato chips. And I have no idea who invented these or what inspired them. Well, actually, I take that part back. I have a pretty good idea what inspired them. But whoever it was, I'd like to thank them, since these are as delicious and irresistible as they are fascinating. And to get started, the first thing we'll do is quickly mix up our dry ingredients, which we'll do by mixing some salt and some baking soda into some all-purpose flour. And because almost always the dry ingredients are mixed into the wet ingredients in a recipe like this, we usually want to mix this up first so it's ready to go. And that's it. Once that's set, we can move on to the wet. And what we'll do is add a touch of white sugar along with some brown sugar to a couple sticks of room temperature, hopefully kind of soft butter. And then we'll take a hand mixer or a whisk if you want a little bit of a workout. And we will blend this until it's nice and light and fluffy. And yes, for like the 100th cookie recipe in a row, I didn't let my butter get soft enough. And you know how you can tell if your butter's too hard? Because stuff's going to fly out of the bowl. Hold on, there's more to come. There we go. So please do as I say, and not as I always do, and leave your butter out so it's nice and soft. But I'm kind of glad that happened, because I get to show you how easy these cleanups are if you have something called a bench scraper, which is one of the most useful tools a cook can have. And if the cooking enthusiast in your life does not have one of those, you absolutely must gift them one. But anyway, back to the dough. And eventually my butter did soften up, and I was able to mix that up until it was light and fluffy, at which point we'll stop and add one whole egg, and we'll mix that in until it's beautifully emulsified. And we're also going to add a little milk and vanilla to this, but we generally don't want to overwhelm our buttery base with too much liquids at once, since it can separate, which is never not upsetting. So to play it safe, we'll blend the egg in first, and then we can add the milk and vanilla and mix that in. And no, the milk doesn't have to come from a cow, but the vanilla extract should be pure and real. And then once we have those blended in, we can stop, and we can add the star of the show, some crushed up potato chips. No, it's not crazy. This really actually does work. And feel free to play around with different varieties, but what I think works best is a nice thick crispy kettle chip, and these are just the regular sea salt ones. And please note, we don't want to crush these up too fine, so I would not go any smaller than this. And then you don't have to add chocolate chips. But I'm going to, although not quite as much as I add to a regular chocolate chip recipe. Okay, I think 3/4 to 1 cup is plenty. But of course that's going to be up to you. I mean, you guys are after all the Wookiees of your potato chip cookies. And speaking of large hairy arms, I used a spatula to blend those in. And that's it. Once that's mixed, we can add in our dry ingredients and then continue mixing with the spatula until this all comes together into a beautiful cookie dough. And of course, to make things a little more challenging, I always seem to use a bowl that's a little too small. And if you've never made cookies before, as you start mixing this, you're going to be thinking there's way too much flour and that this dough is much too dry. But trust me, it's not. Just keep mixing and folding and poking and smashing and smearing. And eventually it will all come together. And that's it. As soon as that flour disappears and everything seems evenly mixed, we'll go ahead and stop and clean off our spatula and maybe smooth down the top a little bit, since what I recommend we do is wrap this up and chill it in the fridge before we scoop our cookies, which by the way is an extremely optional step. I mean, if you want cookies now, you can scoop and bake these right away, but generally best practices say we should chill our dough before we bake, which I did, but for only like a half hour. And to be honest, there's not a huge difference between chilling it and using it right away. Although I would say the texture is a little better if you do. But anyway, what we'll do is transfer rounded tablespoon-sized portions onto a parchment-lined baking sheet, making sure they're nicely spaced, since these cookies definitely are going to spread out. And as you know, I love to use the old 2-1-2-1-2 method, which is going to give us 8 per pan. But if you're in a hurry, you can probably squeeze 12 on here. And if after scooping you decide one of these needs one more chocolate chip, then go ahead and add another one on. All right, that is just you making cookies. And that's it. Once scooped and panned, we can pop these into the center of a 375-degree oven for about 12 minutes. or until the outside edges start to brown and they look like this. Oh yeah, those do look like some proper chocolate chips. And then once these are out of the oven, I like to let them cool on the pan for about 5 minutes before grabbing a spatula and transferring those onto a rack to cool completely. Okay, I'm a warm guy, but I'm not a warm cookie guy. So I always let mine cool all the way down. And then I went ahead and decided to bake up one more pan, which gave me 16 total. And it was right here when I discovered my cooling rack fits exactly 15. So I grabbed one that was already cool to make space and decided to use that one for the official taste test. And that, my friends, is a chocolate chip cookie unlike any other chocolate chip cookie. Right, it doesn't taste like potatoes, in case you were concerned about that. But I would say it's definitely more flavorful than a regular chocolate chip. And whatever those potato chips are adding pairs perfectly with the dark chocolate. But it's really the texture of those chips that makes these so irresistible and highly addictive. Right, these sort of have the texture of an oatmeal chocolate chip, but without that earthy, distracting oat flavor. So to summarize, I absolutely love how these come out, which is why after plating some up, I had to eat a couple more. After, of course, cleansing my palate with a potato chip, which I think you should probably serve alongside, not only to remind people what's in these, but also so we can really appreciate the gorgeous color the potato chips give to the cookies. But having said that, these are so delicious and so texturally fascinating, I would serve these even if they were ugly. But they're not. They're the opposite of ugly. Oh, and if we have any kids watching, do not under any circumstances eat your cookie and place it back down on the plate after each bite. All right, unless you want to stop being invited to parties, that is not something you want to do. And it's only appropriate if you're home alone and you're going to eat this whole plate yourself. And as I mentioned earlier, I don't think we want to put a ton of chocolate chips in these. All right, it does look like we were kind of stingy, but I thought the ratio was absolutely perfect. But whether you sneak a few more in or make this recipe exactly as shown, these are some of the most delicious and interesting cookies I've had in a long time, which is why I really do hope you give them a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.